It was late autumn when everything began to shift. Outside, the air in San Antonio turned crisper, the oak trees shedding leaves like secrets, but inside my chest, the weight only grew heavier. I remember sitting in my old recliner, the same one Nathaniel used to curl up in when he was a boy, his knees tucked against his chest as I read him Goodnight Moon. That chair had faded over the years, its fabric worn thin and fraying at the arms. Like me, I stared at the fireplace, though it hadn't worked in over a decade. I could still picture his little hands stacking firewood next to mine, his cheeks red from the cold. He used to call me Mama Bear. "Mama Bear keeps the cave warm," he'd say proudly, handing me a blanket while I laughed. But Mama Bear no longer felt warm. Mama Bear felt discarded, like something too old to carry into the next chapter. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered the hallways of the home my husband and I had shared for 42 years, touching the walls, the door frames. I passed the photo of us on our wedding day, he in his navy blues, me in a lace dress borrowed from my sister. I stopped before it, letting my fingertips rest on his face. "Henry," I whispered, "what would you think of all this?" The next morning, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years. I opened the old cedar chest at the foot of my bed, the one he built for me on our 10th anniversary. Inside were letters, photos, handmade cards from the kids. I dug through them, searching for something, anything, that reminded me of who Nathaniel used to be. And I found it. A letter, dated February 1991. It was written in pencil, in shaky second-grade handwriting. "Dear Mommy, you are the best cooker and the best hugger in the world. I will buy you a big house one day so you don't have to be tired anymore. Love, Nathaniel." I held that letter like it was fragile glass. Tears came before I could stop them. He did love me once. He meant it. Somewhere along the way, we had both changed. But which of us had changed more? Later that day, Charlotte called. "Eleanor," she began, too sweet, too rehearsed, "we found a lovely two-bedroom in Wash Park. It's brand new, no stairs, close to Nathan's office. Perfect for you." "For me?" I asked quietly. "Yes, of course." "And is it in my name?" The pause. "Well, we figured, since managing paperwork can be stressful, we just..." I hung up. That night I called Grace. She drove 8 hours straight from San Antonio to be by my side. When she walked through the door, her long brown hair wind-blown, face flushed from the cold, I broke down in her arms. "I feel like I'm losing everything," I whispered. "Even my son." "You're not losing him, Mom," she said gently. "You're remembering who he used to be. And that's important." The next day, Grace and I drove to the grant office together. I didn't want to be alone when I reported the concerns. She held my hand the whole time as I told them about the conversations, the account I couldn't access, the house I hadn't seen. The woman behind the desk, Ms. Delaney, nodded sympathetically and promised an inquiry. But the look in her eyes? That was pity. I hated it. I wasn't a victim. I was a mother trying to protect what little she had left. That night, Grace and I sat on the back porch wrapped in quilts, sipping lukewarm tea. The stars blinked above us, quiet and unconcerned. "You know," I said softly, "when Nathan was 5, he broke his arm climbing the sycamore out front. I was terrified. But he didn't cry. He just looked at me and said, 'Mama, I wanted to see the stars closer.'" Grace smiled. "He was always curious. Still is. Maybe too curious for his own good." I nodded. But he trusted me then. With his pain. With his dreams. The pause. And now, he won't even trust me with my own future. The memory of that little boy, brave, dreamy-eyed, with a scraped chin and a heart full of trust, haunted me for days. I wanted to believe he was still in there, buried beneath years of ambition and Charlotte's quiet manipulations. But belief without boundaries is just denial wearing perfume. I couldn't deny it anymore. My son had used my vulnerability to build a life that no longer included me as an equal, but as a dependent. And that broke something inside me. That's when I decided, if they were going to treat me like a burden, then I'd remind them who I really was. A mother who once taught her son how to dream, and who still knew how to protect her own. The woman in the cedar chair wasn't done yet. She still had a voice. And it was time to use it. The next morning, I woke to pounding on my front door. Not the polite knock of neighbors or the gentle rapping of the mailman, but an urgent, angry fist. I shuffled down the hallway in my robe, heart already racing. When I opened it, Nathan stood there, my son, his face flushed with fury, chest rising and falling like a man trying to restrain a storm. In his hand he held a crumpled envelope. "What the hell is this, Mom?" he barked, voice clipped and shaking. Behind him, Charlotte stood silent, arms crossed over her sleek coat, lips pressed into a thin, colorless line. Her gaze locked onto mine with a mixture of pity and disdain, as if I were a child acting out in front of company. I blinked. What are you talking about?" "This," he shouted, thrusting the envelope at me. It was from Adult Protective Services, the copy of the report I had filed. "You're accusing us of stealing?" My throat went dry. The hallway seemed to narrow around me, shadows crowding my vision. I wasn't sure what was happening," I whispered. "You weren't sure?" Nathan repeated, stunned. "So you go to the state?" Charlotte finally spoke, her voice razor-sharp wrapped in silk. "You realize what you've done, Eleanor? You've opened an investigation. Against your own family." I stepped back a pace, suddenly feeling unsteady on my feet. I needed to make sure everything was above board. Nathan's shoulders heaved. "Above board? We've spent the last 3 months organizing your life. Finding the house, setting up the account, dealing with your moods. And you repay us by telling the government we're thieves." I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell him I trusted him, that I knew he loved me, but I didn't say anything. Because somewhere inside me, I wasn't so sure anymore. The silence between us was deafening. Without another word, Nathan turned and walked back to their car. Charlotte hesitated a moment longer, watching me. Her eyes weren't angry. They were cold. The days that followed passed in a blur of whispers and phone calls. I didn't hear from them. Not even a text. Then, 3 days later, a social worker named Janine called to confirm that the state was moving forward with a formal inquiry. "We'll need access to the joint account," she said gently. "We've reached out to Nathan and Charlotte, but they've refused to share full records." My chest tightened. That evening, I sat in my armchair with a cup of chamomile tea growing cold in my hands. Outside, dusk folded over the neighborhood. Inside, only the soft ticking of the mantel clock kept time. Something in me began to unravel. The next morning, I logged into the online portal that linked to the grant account. $11,395.72. That was it. Where once had been nearly $750,000, was now barely enough to cover a modest funeral. My hands trembled as I reached for my notepad. I scribbled figures: the initial grant, the allowance for relocation, the down payment we had discussed. None of it added up. Panicked, I called the bank. After the usual verifications, the representative said plainly, there was a large wire transfer for $640,000 about 10 days ago. Destination account is under the name of Charlotte W. Brooks, listed as trustee. I nearly dropped the phone. That afternoon, I drove with Grace, thank God for Grace, to the county records office. The clerk was kind. A little too kind. "Yes," he confirmed. "There's a property under pending sale, address near Cherry Creek. The deed is being processed under Nathaniel and Charlotte Brooks. No secondary beneficiaries." "No mention of me?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. The clerk shook his head. I stood there, holding the paperwork, feeling like the floor had disappeared beneath me. That night, I sat in the dark, staring at the blinking cursor of a blank email to Nathan. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. "Why, Nathaniel? Why would you do this to me?" But I never typed those words. Instead, I closed the laptop and walked to the kitchen. I poured myself a small glass of bourbon, something I hadn't touched in years, and sat at the table where I once braided his hair before school pictures. Suddenly, a memory surfaced, uninvited. It was his 9th birthday. He had wanted a scavenger hunt. I stayed up the entire night before, drawing maps and writing clues. At the end of the game, in the backyard under the treehouse, I'd hidden a small shoebox with a tiny compass inside. "Now you'll always know how to find your way home," I had told him. He had hugged me so hard I nearly dropped the cake. I sat at that same kitchen table now, alone, wondering if he remembered that compass. If he even knew where home was anymore. What had I done wrong? Had I been too independent? Too stubborn? Or maybe, had I been too trusting? Charlotte had always been polite, yes, but never warm. Even when she smiled, it felt strategic. Her compliments were transactional, her kindness packaged in phrases like, "It's for the best," or, "We're just trying to make things easier for you." I hadn't noticed it at first, but now I saw it everywhere. Later that week, the official letter arrived. State of Colorado, Office of Grant Oversight. Subject, potential misappropriation of senior housing funds. I sank to my knees, the paper crumpling in my hands. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was real, official. The letter didn't accuse them outright. It said there would be a temporary freeze on the relocation process until further investigation. But I knew what that meant. My future was on hold. Because of my son. Because of the daughter-in-law who promised to take care of everything. The next day, I found myself at the edge of the old park where Nathan used to ride his bike. The bench under the oak tree was still there. The wood creaked when I sat, as if groaning under years of stories it had held. I took a deep breath. A part of me wanted to scream, to curse them both, to burn every photo. But another part of me, the part that still saw a little boy with scraped knees and a heart full of dreams, just wanted to cry. So I did. That evening, Grace made me tea and wrapped me in a blanket. She sat on the armrest of my chair like she used to as a teen, resting her chin gently on my shoulder. "We'll figure this out, Mom," she said. I believed her. Because even when trust collapses, even when hope falters, sometimes it only takes one quiet presence to remind you of who you are, and who you still can be. Grace arrived just before noon on a windy Thursday, her flight delayed by an hour. I met her at the terminal, watching as she walked through the gate, suitcase in one hand, her other arm already outstretched for a hug. Her embrace was firm, grounding, like the kind you give to someone on the edge of losing their footing. I hadn't realized how much I needed it until that moment. "Let's go get them," she whispered. That afternoon, we sat side by side in a small conference room at the Grant Oversight Division. The walls were gray, the air conditioned too cold, the fluorescent lights buzzing like angry bees. An investigator named Mr. Carlson sat across from us, files and a laptop spread before him. He was polite, but he didn't sugarcoat things. "The transactions began 2 months ago," he explained, clicking through documents on screen. Multiple transfers were made from the relocation account to a private trust fund under the name Charlotte Whitney Brooks. He turned the monitor toward us. My name was nowhere in the recipient fields. Then he slid across a printed document, digital signatures, time-stamped approvals, and routing instructions. At the bottom, in neat, slanted script, was Nathaniel D. Brooks. My heart thudded against my ribs. Mr. Carlson pointed to a highlighted section. "This is a $640,000 wire transfer. Initiated by Nathaniel Brooks. The receiving account is a trust administered solely by Charlotte." I stared at the paper, the black ink blurring at the edges. Charlotte. My daughter-in-law. The woman who made scones from a box and passed them off as homemade. The woman who told me I shouldn't overexert myself while organizing my own kitchen. The woman who sat in my living room and told me, without blinking, that all of this was for my good. And now she had siphoned away the life vest the government had given me and tied it to her own name. I inhaled slowly, clenching my hands in my lap. "Can I have a moment?" I asked, voice barely audible. Mr. Carlson nodded and stepped out. Grace turned to me, her eyes blazing. "Mom, I'm sorry. I should have questioned this sooner. I should have." "No," I said, cutting her off. "You believed in people. That's not a weakness." Back home, I sat in the kitchen, phone in hand. For a moment, I considered not calling. But I needed to hear it. I dialed. Nathan picked up on the third ring. "Hi, Mum," he said cautiously. "Tell me it isn't true," I whispered. There was a pause. a heartbeat that seemed to stretch forever. What are you talking about? I just left the investigator's office. I saw the transfer logs. The signatures. The trust account. It's all under Charlotte's name. Silence. Then slowly he replied, "It's still your house, Mom." I laughed. It came out bitter, unrecognizable even to myself. Is it? Because it sure doesn't look like mine on paper. We were protecting it, he said quickly. We didn't want you to deal with the stress, the paperwork. We thought this would make it simpler. Then why wasn't I told? Another pause. I didn't think you'd understand. I stood, the phone pressed so hard against my ear it ached. You didn't think? That's $640,000 that was meant for my home. My safety. My future. Charlotte's voice suddenly chimed in through speaker. Eleanor, please. You're making this bigger than it is. You've been paranoid. Accusing us. The stress is affecting your memory. You need rest. You're not well. I froze. Paranoid? Charlotte's tone was clinical, calm, rehearsed. Like someone reporting a malfunction, not speaking to a living person. My mind flashed to that moment on the porch weeks ago, the whisper I overheard. Once it's finalized, it'll set us up. Set them up. There was. The truth, laid bare in the coldest way. I have nothing more to say, I said, trembling. I hung up. The grief didn't come in sobs or shouting. It came in silence. That night, I sat in my bedroom with all the lights off. Grace knocked once and peeked in, but I shook my head. I needed to be alone. On the nightstand sat a faded Polaroid, Nathan at age 4, face covered in peanut butter, a toy hammer clutched in his chubby fist. That photo had lived in my wallet for nearly 2 decades before I moved it here. It used to make me smile. Now it made my chest ache. I remembered when he was 9 and spent the whole week building a treehouse with his father. At the end, he hammered in a crooked wooden sign that read, Nathan's Fort, no moms allowed. But on the very first night he invited me up, handed me a flashlight and 2 Twizzlers and said, you can come in if you promise to bring stories. And now? Now he was building houses that I wasn't even invited into. The next morning, Grace and I returned to the grant office. Mr. Carlson confirmed the investigators were moving toward legal action, pending review from the Ethics Committee. The state sees this as a misappropriation of federal aid, he said. And if it's not rectified, there will be charges. I nodded, though my mind was elsewhere. This wasn't about criminal records. It wasn't even about the money anymore. It was about betrayal. Not the betrayal of a stranger, but the kind that comes from a place you once called home. That afternoon, Grace made tea and brought me a warm muffin. I tried to smile, but my face refused. Mom, she said gently, you don't have to pretend. So I didn't. I cried. Openly, quietly, fully. Not just for the money, but for every bedtime story I ever read, every birthday cake I ever baked, every scraped knee I ever kissed, believing that someday, when I was the one who needed holding, my child would remember what it meant to love without conditions. And now? I wasn't sure he ever would. I didn't know how fast whispers could travel until I felt them like a cold wind against my back, everywhere I went. At the grocery store, Helen Garrett, the woman who used to invite me to her canning circle, barely made eye contact when we crossed paths in aisle 6. Her cart was filled with canned soup and muttered judgment. Some people just can't handle aging with grace, I heard her say to the shelf, but I knew the words were meant for me. 2 pews behind me at Sunday service, I could feel the stairs prickling at the back of my neck like pine needles. My pastor's sermon was about forgiveness that day, but no one seemed eager to extend it to me. I heard she accused Nathan, someone whispered near the vestibule. Such a shame. Poor boy. Always took care of her. Even my own sister, Margaret, who used to call me 3 times a week just to chat about her roses, now answered my calls with tight voices and clipped phrases. Eleanor, she said during our last conversation, are you sure this isn't just confusion? These things happen at your age. These things happen at your age. I hung up. I wasn't confused. I wasn't imagining things. I knew what I saw, what I heard, what I felt in my bones when Charlotte's name appeared on that deed and mine didn't. They're playing it perfectly, Grace said, sitting beside me on the porch swing with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. They're not fighting the facts. They're just letting people draw their own conclusions. All they have to do is stay silent and let the public doubt you. And it's working, I whispered. Grace reached out and held my hand. Her grip was firm. Then we'll stop being quiet. I started collecting everything. Every email that had Charlotte's tone dripping with condescension. Every voicemail from Nathan that danced around the truth. I even found a copy of the real estate proposal Charlotte had accidentally forwarded to me during the house search. A mistake. A digital slip. It was titled, Final Ownership Structure. Only 2 names were on it, Charlotte W. Brooks and Nathaniel D. Brooks. My name? Absent. Beneath the signatures was a legal clause, standard real estate language, but it felt like a dagger. No contingent co-occupants to be listed on title or claim of beneficial ownership. Meaning, me. I printed it all. 3 folders. Color-coded. Red, financial transfers. Blue, communications. Yellow, property documentation. Each time I placed a sheet into a folder, it felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. This was no longer about proving something to others. It was about protecting the truth. I wasn't doing this out of spite. I was doing it out of love for the woman I used to be, the woman who packed homemade lunches, sat through rainy soccer games, stayed up nights worrying about her children's future. Now I worried for my own. One night, I found myself unable to sleep. The house was too quiet, the ceiling too blank. So I wandered downstairs and opened a small wooden box on the living room shelf, one I hadn't opened in years. Inside were old photos from a family reunion, held nearly 15 years ago. In one of them, Nathan stood beside me at the barbecue grill, wearing an apron that said, Grill Sergeant. He was 25. Newly engaged. His hand rested on my shoulder, his smile wide and real. That was before the career, before Charlotte, before everything became about control and appearances. That day had been golden. I remembered the breeze rustling the paper plates, the sound of cousins laughing over cornhole, the way Nathan had grabbed the hose and sprayed Grace and me when we tried to sneak potato salad. I laughed so hard I cried. And now? I could barely recognize the boy in that photo. Where had he gone? The next day, a local reporter knocked on my door. She looked to be in her late 20s, notepad in one hand, phone in the other. Mrs. Brooks, do you have a statement regarding the alleged fraud involving the federal relocation grant? I opened the door just enough to see her face, then quietly shut it. I didn't need pity. I needed justice. But behind the silence I offered the world, I worked. Grace helped me scan documents. We uploaded files to the case manager's portal. We spoke with a pro bono legal advisor who confirmed what we feared. If the grant money wasn't recovered, I could be held liable for the misuse, even if I hadn't authorized it. That night, I sat at the table and stared at a photo of my late husband, Henry. He would have known what to do. He always knew what to do. Help me now, I whispered. I'm tired, but I can't stop. Then came the letter from the church. Dear Eleanor, it has come to our attention that the ongoing legal investigation surrounding your family has caused significant unrest among the congregation. While we continue to pray for all involved, we ask that, for the time being, you refrain from participating in church activities until this matter is resolved. Sincerely, First Unity Board of Elders. My breath caught in my chest. I folded the letter slowly. The betrayal hit harder than I expected. These were people I had prayed with, cooked for, visited in hospitals. And now, I was poison to them. Grace sat beside me on the sofa as I read the letter again. I'm so sorry, Mom, she said softly. I nodded, too tired to cry. They always said God tests you, I murmured. I just didn't think he'd test me through my own son. That night, I took a walk. Down the block. Past the overgrown hedges and flickering porch lights. I stopped at the edge of the park where Nathan used to fly his kite. There was no one there. Just the memory of a boy, chasing the wind, laughing as the string unraveled in his hands. I closed my eyes. In that moment, I didn't see the headlines or the suspicious glances. I saw Nathan as he had been. And for a second I allowed myself to hope, that somewhere deep down, he still remembered the sound of my voice calling him home. They called it a mediation. Such a tidy word for a storm. It had been exactly 33 days since I had last seen my son. 33 mornings of empty coffee cups. 33 nights of silent prayers. I had counted every one. Now, I sat across from him in a room that smelled faintly of lemon disinfectant and bureaucracy. There was a long oak table, sterile white walls, and a stack of documents so thick it seemed to tilt under its own weight. To my left sat Grace, calm as glass, her hands folded tightly in her lap. To my right were two representatives from the Grant Oversight Division, Mr. Randall, who looked like he hadn't smiled in a decade, and Miss Flores, young but sharp, with a tablet in her lap and fire in her eyes. Across from me, Nathan looked thinner. Or maybe it was the lighting. Or maybe guilt eats a person slowly. Charlotte, as always, was poised. Not a hair out of place. Her suit was dove gray. Her fingers, folded delicately on the table, tapped silently against one another. I didn't say anything at first. No one did. Then Mr. Randall cleared his throat. We're here to facilitate clarity and explore potential resolutions between the involved parties. Mrs. Brooks, if you'd like to begin. I nodded. Without a word, I opened the large red folder before me and pulled out the first document, the wire transfer confirmation. I slid it across the table to them. Next came the trust paperwork. Then the deed title. Charlotte's eyes narrowed with each page. But it wasn't until I pulled out Grace's phone and hit play that the room truly shifted. Charlotte's voice filled the air, crisp and cruel. Once this place is ours, we'll let her stay here until, she's not getting any younger. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the hum of the ceiling fan seemed to pause. Charlotte's complexion drained to paper white. Her jaw tightened, but no sound came. Nathan looked like he had just been sucker punched. His mouth opened slightly, then closed, as if his tongue had betrayed him. He turned toward Charlotte, confusion flickering across his face like a dying candle. You told me this wasn't personal, he whispered. Grace leaned forward, voice low but sharp. So it was always about getting the house. You never planned to give it back. Charlotte's voice cracked through the tension like ice. You misunderstood. It wasn't like that. No, I said, finally speaking. My voice was low, but it didn't tremble. We didn't misunderstand anything. I reached into my blue folder this time, emails. Messages filled with carefully worded manipulation. Phrases like, for her own good, and, you know how forgetful she gets. One email, sent by Charlotte to their real estate agent, said plainly, deed should be in Nathan's name only. Beneficiary clause unnecessary. When I laid that one down, Nathan flinched. I never saw that, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Charlotte, you told me. I was trying to protect you, she said, cutting him off. You don't know what it's like to care for someone slipping. I slammed my palm on the table. Slipping? My voice cracked. You mean me? I walked into this room under my own power. I read every document. I pieced this together while everyone else treated me like a relic. Charlotte turned to the mediators. She's emotional. This proves nothing. But Miss Flores, quiet until now, looked up from her tablet and said simply, it proves motive. Nathan looked at me. For the first time in weeks, he looked me in the eyes, not with anger or pity, but fear. Mom, he said, voice hoarse. I didn't know. I swear I didn't. I thought the trust was a legal necessity, that it would make things easier. She handled all the documents. I trusted her. And you didn't trust me, I said. He didn't respond. Charlotte stood abruptly, pushing her chair back with a screech. This is ridiculous. She's just mad because we moved forward without her input. We were trying to help her. It's not our fault she's old, Anne. Stop, Grace cut in. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was deadly. Just stop, Charlotte. This is all on the record. You've said enough. The silence afterward was thick and sacred. Mr. Randall cleared his throat again. Based on the evidence, we're prepared to recommend the following. Immediate restoration of funds, full reassignment of property ownership to Eleanor Brooks, and an independent review of all financial activity related to the trust. If compliance is not met, the state will pursue legal action, including charges of grant fraud. Charlotte opened her mouth, then closed it. Ms. Flores added, "We are also considering adding a restriction to future grant access for both Mr. and Mrs. Brooks." I could see it hit Charlotte like a blow to the ribs. Access to federal grants meant potential business ventures, reputation, leverage. She had wanted the house, yes. But more than that, she wanted power. And now it was slipping. She sat down hard and said nothing more. When the meeting ended, Grace helped me gather the folders. Nathan stayed in his seat, his hands on his knees, his eyes glazed. I paused for a moment watching him. He looked more like a lost child than a man. "Mom," he murmured. I really didn't know. I didn't answer. I couldn't, not then. But I nodded once. And I walked away. That night, Grace and I sat by the window. She poured wine into 2 glasses, something we hadn't done since Henry's funeral. "Well," she said, "that was biblical." I chuckled, dry and tired. I don't feel like David. But she sure felt like Goliath. We clinked glasses. And then Grace pulled something from her pocket. A small box. Inside was a key. "What's this?" I asked. "It's for the new house. The state approved the reassignment this afternoon. It's yours again." I held it between my fingers. Cold. Solid. For the first time in months, something belonged to me again. Not because someone allowed it. Because I had fought for it. And won. The envelope was thick. Cream-colored. Embossed with the state seal of Colorado. It sat in my mailbox like a verdict before the trial. When I opened it, the words were clinical and cold. Notice of pending legal action, State of Colorado versus Nathaniel D. Brooks and Charlotte W. Brooks. Misuse of federal funds. Misrepresentation of beneficiary. Even in black and white legal ink, the truth was staggering. They didn't come quietly. Their lawyer, a man with slicked back hair and a voice like wet concrete, had requested mediation. They're willing to settle, he'd told the grant board. They'll return $400,000 of the $640,000 in question and relinquish all claim to the property. He'd said it like it was a generous offer. I said no, because it wasn't about the money anymore. It was about what they'd done to my name, to my autonomy, to my trust. I couldn't put a price tag on betrayal. When the hearing came, I wore navy blue, the same dress I'd worn to Henry's retirement ceremony 2 decades ago. Something about it felt fitting, as if I were putting to rest the last flicker of the woman I used to be. Grace walked beside me through the courthouse doors. She held my hand even though I didn't ask her to. She had a way of knowing when I needed grounding. The courtroom was quiet. Nathan sat 2 rows ahead of me. He didn't look back. Charlotte sat beside him, her hair pulled into a severe bun. For once, her blouse looked rumpled. Her hands trembled slightly in her lap. When the judge entered, we all stood. The caseworker read the charges. The numbers felt absurd out loud, hundreds of thousands siphoned from a federal grant meant to protect the vulnerable. And I, apparently, had been the vulnerable. They called me to testify. My knees didn't shake. I walked slowly, purposefully to the front. The bailiff helped me up the steps. The oath was easy. I swear to tell the truth. I already had. To anyone who would listen. To those who wouldn't. Even to myself. They asked questions, straightforward ones. Did you authorize the transfer of $640,000 into a private trust not bearing your name? No. Did you sign the title paperwork designating your son and daughter-in-law as sole owners of the property? No. Were you informed of these decisions in advance? Not until it was too late. They asked about the voicemail. I played it again. Charlotte didn't flinch this time. But Nathan, he did. His eyes darted down. His shoulders curled forward. I answered each question clearly. I didn't cry. Afterward, as I stepped down from the witness box, I passed by their table. For just a second, Nathan glanced up. Our eyes met. It wasn't defiance I saw. It was something much harder to carry. Shame. And something else, something so small, so buried beneath months of silence. regret. But I didn't stop walking. Charlotte took the stand. Her voice was different now, frayed, cracked at the edges. "I didn't intend for things to go this far," she whispered. "It was about control, yes, but not malice. I thought we could manage it better than she could. I thought I was helping." Helping? A hollow laugh built in my chest, but I swallowed it. She had been helping herself. And my son had let her. Outside the courtroom, the wind was sharp. It bit through my scarf and chilled the sweat along my back. Grace wrapped an arm around my shoulders. "You were incredible in there." I nodded, but my heart was too heavy to feel triumphant. Across the parking lot, Nathan stood alone. Charlotte had already gotten into a black sedan with their attorney. Nathan didn't follow her. He just stood there, staring at the ground like it might open up and swallow him whole. For a moment, I thought he might walk toward me. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his car keys, and turned away. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and a photo of Nathan as a child. He was 4 in the picture, grinning beside a snowman, his mittened hands covered in glitter glue from the Christmas card he'd just made. On the back, in clumsy block letters, he had written, "To Mommy, I love you big like the sky." I pressed my fingers to the photo. Not crying, just remembering. Because that little boy had once known how to love without taking. And somewhere along the line, he'd forgotten. The following week, the state issued its decision. Nathan and Charlotte would be placed on probation and barred from accessing any state or federal housing programs for 10 years. The property in question was to be fully transferred back to me within 30 days. They would repay the full amount, $640,000, or face civil suit. It wasn't jail. It wasn't humiliation. But it was justice. And it was enough. Still, the house no longer felt like a home. Too many ghosts in the woodwork. Too many echoes in the empty rooms. So I made a decision. With Grace's help, I contacted a small nonprofit that helped seniors find independent housing in eco-friendly communities. The idea of shared gardens and walking trails, of morning coffee with people who'd lived long and full and hard lives, it appealed to me. I sold the house. Moved into a modest cottage just outside Boulder. Started again. One evening as I unpacked my last box, I found an old journal. Inside, tucked between pages yellowed by time, was a note from Nathan. Dated 2006. "Mom, thank you for teaching me how to stand tall, even when I don't feel tall inside. Love, Nate." I closed the journal, held it to my chest, and let the tears fall. Not just for what had happened, but for what could have been. I hadn't seen Nathan since the hearing. It had been almost 3 weeks, 22 days of quiet that felt more like aftershocks than peace. Some nights I found myself reaching for the phone, then stopping, as if my hand remembered the pain my heart had tried to forget. And then one morning, as I stepped out onto the porch with my tea, I found an envelope nestled beneath the welcome mat. My name, Mom, was written in that same looping, thoughtful script I had first seen on his childhood Mother's Day cards. I stood there for a long time, the paper warm from the morning sun, before I opened it. I've started seeing a therapist. Grace is right, I'm unraveling. There's a weight on my chest I can't shake. Not since that day in court. Not since I saw your face when I said nothing. I've spent so much of my adult life pretending I was in control. Charlotte was the planner. I let her lead. I thought I was protecting you. But really I was just protecting my pride. I didn't stop her. That's on me. I'm sorry. Not the hollow kind. The kind that's cracked open. I miss you. I read the letter 3 times before folding it back into the envelope. I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't know what to say. What do you say to a son who finally sees the fire only after the house is burned down? Grace called that evening. He moved out, she said. Just packed a bag and left Charlotte's condo last weekend. He's crashing at a friend's. Says he doesn't know who he is anymore. I stayed silent. She continued, he said he thinks he's broken something in you he doesn't know how to fix. I finally spoke. He's right. There was a pause. Then Grace said gently, but even broken things can be mended, Mom. You taught us that. A week later, Stephanie, my niece, visited. We hadn't spoken much since everything happened. Stephanie had always been the peacekeeper, the type who brought apple pies to family dinners and quickly changed the subject when things got tense. She came bearing no pies this time. Just a look of quiet remorse. She sat across from me at my kitchen table, hands wrapped around her mug like she was trying to keep herself from coming apart. "Eleanor," she said, "I owe you an apology." "You don't," I replied gently. "You just didn't know." "I didn't want to know," she admitted. "Charlotte told us you were unraveling, that you were getting forgetful. I thought she was trying to help. I didn't want to think otherwise." Her eyes glistened. "But I read the court transcripts. And I listened to the voicemail. And I believe you. I believe you, and I'm sorry I didn't sooner." I reached across the table and took her hand. "Some wounds don't need to be examined. Just acknowledged." "Thank you," I whispered. Words spread slowly, like honey dripped through old copper pipes. Cousin Eleanor was right. Nathan and Charlotte had lied. The matriarch everyone had quietly pitted had, in fact, been the only one seeing things clearly. It wasn't vindication I felt. It was something quieter, heavier. Grief, for the years I spent second-guessing myself. For the moments I'd accepted condescension disguised as kindness. For how easy it had been for everyone to believe I was the one losing touch. One afternoon, I received a small box in the mail. Inside was a hand-carved wooden bird. No note. Just the bird. I smiled instantly. When Nathan was 7, we'd gone to a craft fair downtown. He'd spent hours watching an old man whittle tiny animals from pine scraps. That evening, he had told me, "One day, I'll make you something that lasts forever." I never did get that sculpture. Until now. I ran my fingers over its wings, the grain smooth and light. And for a moment, I let myself believe that maybe this was his way of making amends, without needing permission to speak. Later that week, I hosted Grace and Stephanie for lunch. We sat in the backyard, sun filtering through the sycamore, the breeze stirring fallen leaves. I hadn't felt that much warmth around a table in years. After the meal, Stephanie leaned back and said, "You know, maybe everything had to crack wide open for us to find our way back." Grace added, "Truth has a funny way of showing up, even if it has to burn everything else down to be seen." I looked at them both, strong, flawed, honest. My family. Changed, but still mine. That evening, I took out the bird and placed it on the windowsill beside the dining table. It caught the sunset just right, its silhouette stretching across the room like a memory. And I knew then, I hadn't lost everything. Some things I had finally found. I never thought I'd end up in Golden, Colorado. But now, as I sit on the small wooden porch of my new home, coffee in hand, the scent of pine in the air, and the hum of cicadas rising in the distance, I wonder why I didn't come here sooner. It's quiet, peaceful. The house is modest, just 2 bedrooms and a reading nook tucked beside a bay window, but it's mine. Every floorboard, every light switch, every flower I plant outside belongs to no one but me. And most of all, it feels safe. For the first time in what feels like years, I am safe. The house sits at the edge of a cul-de-sac surrounded by low, rolling hills. I can see the mountains from the back porch. Grace helped me move in. She insisted on doing the heavy lifting, though I surprised her, and myself, by carrying more than she expected. "Mom," she said, slightly out of breath, "where was this strength during the Denver mess?" I smiled, saving it for when I could use it for myself. Our new neighbors came by that afternoon. A retired nurse named Marjorie brought peach jam. A young couple across the street, Luis and Tanya, waved shyly, their toddler hiding behind their legs. I made a mental note. This is what community is supposed to feel like. Not suspicion, not silence, but kindness. A week after I'd settled in, I received a letter from the State Housing Grant Office. This time, there was no legal threat, no invoice, no fear. Just an invitation. "Dear Mrs. Brooks, your voice has proven powerful. We would be honored if you would speak at our upcoming community forum on elder financial abuse. Your perspective could change lives." I held the letter in my lap for a long while. Speak? The thought sent ripples of fear through my chest. I hadn't stood in front of a crowd since high school debate club, and even then, my palms had sweated like faucets. But something inside me said yes before I had time to say no. The day of the forum arrived faster than I expected. The event was held in a modest auditorium at a senior resource center. Folding chairs lined the carpeted floor, and a podium stood beneath soft lighting. I wore my dark green cardigan, the one Henry always said made my eyes look like the forest after rain. There were about 60 people in attendance. Most were older. Some sat with their adult children. Others came alone, like me. As I approached the microphone, I felt my throat tighten. My hands trembled slightly as I unfolded the notes I'd written the night before. And then I began. "I'm not a lawyer," I said, my voice thin at first. "I'm not a professional speaker or an expert in finance. I'm just someone who loved her son, trusted her family, and almost lost everything because of it." A murmur rippled through the audience. "But this isn't a story about victimhood," I continued. "It's a story about survival, about finding your voice again, even when people you love try to silence it." I told them about the grant, about the documents, about the deception, but I also told them about the strength it took to say no, to fight back, to tell the truth even when no one wanted to hear it. As I spoke, I noticed an older woman in the front row nodding, tears streaming silently down her face. A man 2 rows back held his wife's hand tightly. And somewhere near the back, a middle-aged woman scribbled notes with a fierce kind of urgency. When I finished, the room was quiet. Then applause. Not the polite kind, but the long, sustained kind that wrapped around you like a hug. Afterward, people came up to me one by one. Some shared their stories. Others simply said thank you. A few said I'd given them the courage to speak up, to investigate their own finances, to ask the hard questions, to stop apologizing for wanting to be safe. That night, I sat by my window with the curtains drawn back, the stars stretching wide over the hills. I thought of Henry, of course. He would have been proud. He always believed I had more fire in me than I let on. And I thought of Nathan, of how the boy who once held my hand across parking lots had grown into a man lost in his own storm. I didn't know if we'd ever find our way back to each other completely. Some wounds never close. But maybe they didn't have to bleed forever. I smiled then, remembering a summer evening when Nathan was 10. He had found a baby bird fallen from its nest. While Grace panicked and ran for Henry, Nathan had cupped it gently in his hands, his eyes wide but calm. "It's okay, little guy," he whispered. "I've got you." He built a tiny box nest from shoelaces and tissue paper, kept it on his nightstand for days. It didn't survive. But I never forgot the way he tried. That boy had been gentle once. And maybe, just maybe, that boy still lived somewhere inside the man. As I closed my eyes, the wind shifted. It carried the faint scent of pine and something else, something new. Freedom. Not the kind that comes from isolation, but the kind that comes when you finally said, "This is who I am. This is my life. This is my voice. And I won't let it be taken again." It came on a Tuesday. The mailman knocked twice, then left it in the box like any other delivery. No fanfare, no urgency. Just another white envelope in a world full of them. But the handwriting on the front stopped me cold. I knew it instantly. Neat, careful cursive. Loops in all the right places. I hadn't seen that handwriting in almost a year. Nathan. I stood in my front hallway for a long time, staring at it. The air was still. The tea on the table behind me had already gone cold. The dog next door barked once and went quiet again. Finally, I opened it. It's been a year. A year since the courtroom. A year since the last time I looked you in the eye and couldn't speak. I don't expect this to fix anything. I don't deserve that. But I need you to know what I've learned. I didn't just lose money, or property, or a marriage. I lost you. And I didn't even realize the cost until it was too late. My hands trembled slightly as I sat down at the kitchen table. The sun spilled through the window, illuminating the tiny specks of dust floating in the air like whispers. Outside, a squirrel darted across the garden path, leaves scattering behind it. But inside, it was just me, and his voice, returning to me in words inked with regret. For so long I thought I was doing what was best. I thought protecting the money meant protecting you. But what I was really protecting was my pride, my image of being the strong one, the provider. I let Charlotte take the reins, and I told myself it was just paperwork, just structure. But I heard you testify. I saw you stand there, steady, clear, stronger than I've ever seen you. And for the first time in my life, I realized I'd been blind to your strength. Mom, you were never fragile. I just treated you that way because I didn't want to see the truth. That you didn't need me to manage your life. You just needed me to respect it. Tears blurred the ink. I hadn't cried this way in a long time. Not the kind of sobbing that folds your body, but the kind that simply flows, like something heavy is being rinsed from your chest in silence. I folded the letter closed, then opened it again. Read it all over once more. Charlotte and I were no longer together. Therapy revealed things we hadn't spoken of in years: power, control, resentment. She didn't change. And maybe I never really knew who she was. But that doesn't excuse what I let happen. You trusted me, and I betrayed that. You've always been the one who showed up, even when things were broken. And I broke us. I understand if you never respond. But I wanted you to know. I see you now. And I'm sorry, not just for what I did, but for how invisible I made you feel. I pressed the paper to my chest. My eyes shifted to the fireplace mantel, where my favorite photo stood. Nathan, no older than 9, his muddy hands holding up a small frog, beaming, proud. Behind him, I stood with a backpack, laughing. That picture was taken during our first and only solo hike together. Just the two of us, before teenage years pulled us apart, before life became complicated, before love had to be proven. He had held my hand on that trail the entire time, afraid of getting lost. Now, decades later, I wasn't sure who was more lost, him or me. I didn't write back. Not that day. Not yet. Instead, I took the letter and placed it carefully into a small wooden box, the same one where I kept our family's memories: the frog photo, the hospital bracelet from his birth, a tiny origami crane he once made for my birthday, long before he learned the word responsibility. I set the box beside my armchair and sat quietly, looking out the window toward the mountains. I let the silence hold me like a lullaby. Forgiveness is strange. People speak of it like it's a key, a door, a switch to be flipped. But real forgiveness? It's quieter. It's a slow loosening of the grip on something that once held your heart in its teeth. I wasn't there yet, but maybe I was starting. I poured myself a cup of tea, fresh this time, and I whispered into the warm steam rising from the cup. I see you too, Nathan. Because trust isn't something to be managed. It's something to be guarded. Like our elders. Like our hearts. Like the pieces of ourselves we give to those we love, hoping they'll carry them gently. Even when they don't.